Wenn du schnell und effizient Deutsch lernen möchtest, dann schau dieses Video bis zum Ende an. In this video, I'm going to be telling you how to learn German based on my own personal experience learning the language, but I'm also going to give you some general good practices for learning languages. I will be splitting this video into sections. The first being general tips that I think are really important to understand when trying to learn a language. Then the sections will be divided into the different language levels, so specific tips and resources for beginner, intermediate and advanced learners. Hopefully giving you a generalized step-by-step plan to progress in German and eventually be fluent in German. First tip is frequency over quantity. And I know this sounds counterintuitive. Surely studying more is better. And in a sense, you're correct. The more you study, the faster you will learn the language. But spacing out your study is arguably way more important. It's Monday here today when I'm filming this video. And if I were to ask you to study German for 7 hours today, and then next Monday ask you how much you remember on what you studied, how much do you think you could actually tell me? Now, if I was to ask you to study 1 hour a day for 7 days and ask you the same question, I think most of us would agree that the second option is better. Maybe because it's fresher in your memory. But there's also a huge other benefit for the second option, and that's based on the spaced repetition principle and something called consolidation. Seeing something again and again and studying something again and again is such an important way to really hardwire the information into your brain. Something that a study cram session can't really do. Although you might remember a lot the next day if I were to ask you on Tuesday, it is not really going to stick around and fades very quickly, which is not overly useful when you're trying to learn a language. Another huge player is consolidation. Every time you go to sleep, your brain replays the events of that day. And long story short, this helps create the memories that stick around. So the more frequent you study, the more chances you get for this consolidation thing to take place. The second tip is motivation. And I know we all know that we need to be motivated, otherwise what's the point of learning the language in the first place? But that's not really what I'm going to be talking about here now in this tip. Actually, what I'm going to be talking about, I don't think there's much research on it, but it's something that I think is super important and I try and keep in mind when I'm learning a language because I think it makes a really big difference. So I study neuroscience and I'm going to be starting a PhD in Columbia University later this year. And during my studies, came across this experiment about a barn owl wearing vision disrupting goggles. Strange? Super strange. I know, but bear with me. The point of this experiment, or rather the part that I found the most interesting and applicable to language learning, was that when the owls were forced to hunt for their food, forced to hunt for mice wearing these goggles, they adapted to the different vision. The vision was offset much quicker than if the owls were just given the food. My takeaway from this, and the point I'm trying to make, is that the brain, and we all know this already, it can change, it can adapt, it is plastic, so to speak. When you put it into a situation where it needs to change, it can adapt and learn so much faster. I believe, in part, that this reflects what happens when people move to a new country where their native language isn't spoken or not spoken widely. They need to learn the language of that country, otherwise they're not able to communicate and comfortably live in the environment. So the drive to learn the language is there. They're in a situation where they need to adapt in order to live. Not really, but you get my point. And you really need to put yourself in this position because learning a language is so energy and resource demanding, so taxing, that the brain really needs to be convinced that it's worthwhile making the memories, learning all these new words, learning all of these grammar points. Otherwise, why would it do that? This can be done in different ways and I'm trying to experiment with different techniques that help, but I think just the easiest is just exposure. Expose your brain to the language as much as you can. I do this through extensive reading and I'll cover this later in the tips as well because there's a specific app I use for this as well. As a beginner to German, I think it's best to just simply look on YouTube for courses. I did these, the A1 and A2 playlist, I'll put them on the screen, from the channel Learn German. Again, they're simple, They're free, which is a big thing when you're starting out in the language. They're also easy to watch, and there's little to no wasted time because the videos are short and they're packed with information. There are other great channels that you can check out. I'm not going to be able to name them all here, but what I would recommend if you're interested is to look at the Super Easy German videos on the Easy German channel. These cover a range of topics that are specifically useful for when you're just starting out in German. So you can master these specific contention points for beginner learners, which makes and smooths out the path from beginner to intermediate that much more. A lot of you might be asking about whether it's important to start using apps or investing into your language learning at this point, and I don't really think so. I think it's important just to expose yourself to the language in a really relaxed, stress-free environment to begin with. Okay, now we have the upper beginners, or like the lower intermediate group of learners. At this point, I think you're fully valid to start investing or using books, courses, apps, etc. What I did and what I'm still doing is using an app called Link. And because I had a basis from the beginning from all the courses I did on YouTube, I jumped right into what are called the mini stories. There are 60 mini stories for most of the languages on the app. They cover the most frequently used vocab and grammar in the language, getting progressively more difficult. You could read and listen along to all of the lessons. So I used this app to expose myself to language in a more enjoyable way than jumping right into a textbook or a course book. And it uses comprehensible input. And if you remember from one of the points in the beginning of this video, where exposure and trying to figure out the language is super good for putting your brain into a situation where it thinks it needs to learn, this is exactly how I did that, and I'm still doing that by using comprehensible input via the Link app, which of course you can find the affiliate link once again in the description of this video. When I was in an intermediate stage, I continued with Link. I had finished all the mini stories and I felt quite comfortable in my listening comprehension and my reading comprehension at this stage. So I really tried to step it up a notch by importing all of the content that I enjoyed from the internet into Link. So that would be articles, the news, podcasts, books, etc. I started to read the Percy Jackson books, and after a certain amount of time I read them all on Link because it really bridges the gap between content that you want to read and want to consume versus the ability you have to actually consume content. As an intermediate, I also wanted to improve or really to start speaking in German. And I did this by taking a good few lessons on italki. And this really helped to quickly and efficiently boost my German speaking abilities. However, it did cost a good bit of money. You essentially get to pick your German tutor, and there are one-on-one lessons hosted over the italki video system, or if you're more comfortable, or if the tutor's more comfortable, over Zoom. And each teacher is different. That's why you get a few trial lessons to see which one you vibe with the most. And if you are interested in checking this out for yourself, another link in the description you will see is for italki, and it lets you get a discount or a voucher after your first lesson. After my lessons on italki, I felt comfortable enough to get myself a language exchange partner, and I used the app HelloTalk for this, but there's also others like Language Exchange, etc. We ended up speaking mostly German to one another, which was great for me. But the premise or the point of this app is that it is like 50-50. Half the time you spend speaking the language you want to learn, which is typically their native language, and then half the time you speak your native language, which is the language that your partner wants to learn. This is hands down the best option if you have the time. If you have the money and you don't have the time, then italki would probably be better because it's a professional teacher, and all the time you spend in this hour is focused on you improving in the language rather than it's split between you and your partner. But HelloTalk or other language exchange apps are a really nice way to make friends in a language, which I think is highly undervalued. I mentioned the reading, which was the Percy Jackson books. I mentioned the speaking practice, which was either the italki lessons or the HelloTalk sessions with my language partner. But what I did to, I think, really rocket my German, is that a phrase? I don't know. to really improve my German was that I was listening to and reading and analyzing Easy German podcasts. So when you subscribe to their Patreon, and they aren't sponsoring this video, but I think it's one of the best things you can do, is subscribe to the Easy German Patreon, get their transcripts, and then I uploaded them into Link so I could analyze them word for word, sentence by sentence, and just deconstruct German. And it's so good because it's in a scenario where it's one person usually talking to one other person, so you're learning all of these phrases that you can really just use anywhere else in your daily life. They are podcasts spoken at an upper intermediate level, I would say, so they're perfect at this stage. And again, hands down, I think the most efficient way to learn German. I'm also doing it now for Spanish because I really believe this is what made my German as good as it was that quickly. And again, you can do this elsewhere. You don't need to use Link. You can just do it manually. I just found that using Link made this so much easier, and it was somewhere where I wanted to invest my money in because I thought it was the best option for me. If you want other YouTube channels or other podcasts that are good for specific levels, then I do have 2 other videos on my channel talking about exactly that. For the upper intermediate or advanced learners, at this point you should be able to understand most of what you're reading and listening to. If you have been using comprehensible input, as I have been discussing throughout this video, then you will have noticed a really natural and fluid increase in your language ability. I have multiple videos on my channel as well documenting my process learning German using the comprehensible input approach. I do apologize for the quality of the videos in my early days on this channel, or even a few months in, but they're still worth a watch if you're curious. I'll reiterate it here: if you haven't started talking to a language exchange partner or someone in German, this is the point. You really should start. I know it's scary. It just really shows you that you can use what you've learned to communicate with someone. And I think that is the beauty of learning a new language. This ability to open doors and communicate with others that you may not have been able to if you hadn't picked up German. I like to consider this stage in learning a language, learning German, the schooling stage, where you have learned enough by yourself using comprehensible input or whatever other resources that you used or techniques that you implemented, and now you just need to fine-tune it. My go-to again is YouTube because it's free and there are so many helpful videos talking about German grammar. One of my favorite channels is this one here I'll put on the screen. But I also think if you like them and want to invest in them, grammar books at this stage may not be a bad idea. I have been using and I'm using one called Aktiv B2 C1, but I've also checked out the one before that for A2 and B1. I can't speak for all of the different ones out there. I can't say that these are the best, but I can say that these are very useful. And what you will find cool at this stage when you start, if you haven't already, looking at the grammar and looking into German grammar specifically, is that you will have come across a lot of it before. All this natural exposure that you're getting through comprehensible input trains your brain to look at these patterns. So although it might have a really complex name, some grammar point, you will already know what it means and how to use it. This will just be solidifying your understanding of it in other scenarios. It'll be putting all of the hours of work and all of the soakage hours to practice by just doing some exercises on grammar points. And it makes this learning from a grammar book part of learning a language so much easier because you're not also trying to learn more things. You're only trying to reinforce what you already inherently picked up, which is amazing. And this is probably a point that differs between others that advocate for the comprehensible input approach, is that I think learning grammar at this stage is good and it's correct. Others may disagree. Others may say that you don't need it, that comprehensible input is this all-powerful technique to learn a language. And you know what? Who am I to say that they're wrong? What I can say is that most of us, on this channel at least, who by viewer statistics are adults, and why not take advantage of the years of schooling that we all had in order to learn grammar? In comparison to a child, our memory and ability to understand complex thoughts is way more advanced. So I don't understand why people don't try and put that to use. And I think at this point it can be very useful. The last little point I want to make at this stage in your language journey is writing, because we've talked about speaking, listening, and reading, and of course, if you're paying attention in this video, you might have been wondering, where does writing come in? It's entirely up to you how you want to do this. You can get pen pals, your language exchange partner can also help you with writing. And I might do another video on using AI, but ChatGPT is going to be your friend in this case. You want to just ask for a prompt, say, hey, can I have a writing prompt for B2 in German? And then you get the prompt, you write it all up, you send it back in, and you ask for, and this is important, you ask for corrections with explanations. The with explanations allows you to actually study from the output of ChatGPT, which is super useful. But again, I might dive into this more in a future video. So if you're interested in that, then stick around on this channel by subscribing. Would really appreciate it. And while you're at it and while I'm mentioning it, maybe leave a like too. For the advanced stage, I think my only tip is just to keep doing what you're doing. It's obviously working. Start reading novels in German if that's your thing. It's such a good way to keep passively increasing your vocabulary over time. You can continue to use Link to increase your vocabulary in more advanced topics. What I really like to do is, if there's a specific topic such as law or just scenarios or areas in the language where I know I don't know enough about, I can just type it into the search bar in Link's lesson search tab or whatever you want to call it, and then I can filter for the language level I want, so the advanced, and then I can look through the lessons that way and learn very advanced specific vocab for a weak point in my language. You can also continue using YouTube for more advanced topics. I really like this channel. She is wonderful. I would highly recommend. And if you are like me at this stage, you might be super tempted to learn another language. Go for it. I think it's amazing that you've got this love for language learning at this stage. What I would advise against is to completely ignore German. So keep something in your life German, whether that's a partner or it's just reading and watching stuff in German like me. And I also throw in a study session now and then of grammar points or anything to brush up on. I do have other videos on my channel going over specific tips. So if you would rather have watched a video about 20 tips to learn a language, then I do have those on my channel, so please go check those out. You can also find, as I've mentioned, my German progress videos on other languages if you're interested in that. Also, because I do have a science background, I dabble in doing a few science-based language learning videos, which again you can find. But that is everything for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, again, and haven't already, leave a like on this video. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands here. And yeah, goodbye.